Please give her a warm welcome, Ms. Jennifer Moore.
Thank y'all so much. I'm going to give a few little caveats before I get started. I am from just south of Memphis, Tennessee. I'm from South Haven, Mississippi. So if y'all need a translator for me, just let me know if you don't understand something I'm saying. But I am so pleased to be here. I was telling Kelly, she was asking me what I thought of this conference. And I've been to a lot of kidney conferences, spoken at a lot of conferences, and I'll tell you, I've never seen anything like this. Like, y'all have blown me away. Just the community and just everything. It's just been so amazing. So I consider it a complete honor that I can stand up here and speak to you, and I hope that you find this very helpful. So let's go ahead and start. Oh, and let me tell you this too. So I was gonna have a book table, but it just seemed like a lot to get the books here. So I have books I'm gonna give away. So I'm gonna give away 2 in this session. So what we're gonna do at the end is just pay attention, and then we'll ask you some questions. Whoever gets it right, I'm gonna give you a book. So. All right, let's get started. So what are we going to do today? We are going to talk about the state of affairs in kidney disease because unfortunately, people with kidney disease don't typically get help nutritionally. They're not referred to dietitians, and so we're going to talk about that. We're going to understand the overarching benefits of plant-based nutrition just as a whole. So even if you're a parent, or you don't, or you're a family member, you don't have kidney disease, this is still relevant for you because it's helpful overall. We're going to list 3 reasons that lowering protein intake is helpful, and we're going to describe why plant-based diets are helpful. We'll talk about 2 watch-outs, and a lot of that is because most of the information on the internet has to do with dialysis patients. So if you're not a dialysis patient, it's not relevant to you, but people don't know that because they don't say that. And then we'll provide 3 tips for implementing this into your lifestyle. Okay, so this is a cross-sectional, like they ask questions to people with kidney disease, just all different diagnoses. And and what they came up with was they said that overall, after this cross-sectional survey, they said over 48% of people with kidney disease have never seen a registered dietitian at all. Nearly half state their doctor never suggested it. Most participants believe that medical nutrition therapy, which is what dietitians do, that would be helpful. And that patients, that they would attend another appointment. So a lot of times doctors will say, well, they're not going to go to another appointment, or they think it's important, or whatever, but they are interested in being referred to a dietitian, but it never happens. And so most of the people who come to me were not referred by a doctor. They dug me up, like they found me. Even people from other countries have reached out to me because they're digging around on the internet looking for help and they just can't seem to find it. So I'll tell you, so I'm originally from the Mississippi Delta, which is, so Mississippi is the most unhealthy state in the nation, if you didn't know that. So we make every other state look really good. And the Mississippi Delta is the most unhealthy part of the most unhealthy state of Mississippi, and that's where I grew up. So if you think that like I've always lived this way because I follow a plant-based diet, I have not. In Mississippi Delta, we eat meat and we eat everything fried. And so I don't live there anymore, but that's how I grew up. So, but as I began to research this, I began to see that, gosh, plant-based nutrition, that is just like, so the research is highly evidence-based. It's overwhelming, the research is. There's long-term research and epidemiology. If you look at civilizations that eat plant-based diets, they're always healthier, they always live longer, and so it's just there. And so what I want to do just to start this out is we're just going to talk about just like the overall benefit of plant-based nutrition, because a lot of times when I talk about this for kidney disease, people will think, well, it might be deficient or there might be something wrong, but that's not the case. So this is just an update on plant-based nutrition for physicians is what this is. But if you look at it, and these are just some different things like aside from kidney disease. So obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, which we know all these things tend to go along with kidney disease. But that this was a survey of different studies. And what they came up with was that vegan and vegetarian diets are highly effective for weight loss. And these are just the highlights I think of that. The Adventist health studies, so those are studies of the Seventh-day Adventists in California because they eat plant-based diets and they've been studying for years and years and years and years. But the Adventist health studies found that vegetarians have half the risk of developing diabetes as non-vegetarians. The lifestyle heart trials by Dean Ornish, Caldwell Esselstyn did similar lifestyles. They're the only trials that have shown regression of cardiovascular disease using plant-based diets. And then high blood pressure, so in 2010, the dietary guidelines actually pushed people towards a more plant-based diet because it's overwhelming that lowers blood pressure. So, but now let's switch to kidneys. So for kidney disease, what we want to talk about, the reason we're talking about plant-based nutrition is what we're going to talk about is a low protein diet, but also the type of protein is important. So let's start first with a low protein. Why low protein? So of the three I'm gonna hold that up because I have a picture I'm gonna show you, but it decreases nitrogen waste. So your kidneys have to clear nitrogen waste. And so when you eat low protein, you're going to decrease the amount of nitrogen waste that your body has to clear. You're going to lessen the load on the kidneys, and you're going to lower intraglomerular pressure. So a low protein diet has been shown to lower intraglomerular pressure, which may extend kidney function for the long term, and this has been shown in both animal and human studies. So I know y'all have been in some of the other talks, because I have too, where it talks about glomerulus. You don't want a lot of pressure there, and so a plant-based diet will lower that. Okay, so let's talk about nitrogen waste. Now, y'all bear with me, we're going back to chemistry. So the top, let's see, it's going to be left for you. That is carbohydrate. The one with the R's, that is fat. And the one on the bottom is protein. Now, you'll notice all three of these have C's and H's, right? But the protein is the only one with an N, and that is nitrogen. And that is why we focus on protein for kidney health and to slow progression of kidney disease, because we don't want to drive already damaged kidney disease in the ground. We want to give these kidneys a rest, right? Well, if the kidneys have to filter nitrogen waste, then it makes sense that you're going to lower protein intake. Okay, so we're talking about now protein breakdown. So you get protein from food you eat, and you also have what we call endogenous breakdown of protein. That means in your body, you're constantly building up and breaking down protein, constantly doing that. And both of those produce a nitrogen waste. And so protein breakdown then involves what we call deamination. Now I'm gonna go back. Deamination, if I can, instead I have to push it hard. There we go. Deamination is just where when the protein is delivered, that N on the side of that protein is broken off. Okay, and the liver converts this to a highly toxic ammonia, and then that ammonia must go through the urea cycle, goes to the kidneys, and is filtered out. So if you think about urea, think about when you're thinking of your lab, blood, urea, nitrogen, you're wanting to lower protein intake. So before, there was a dialysis center on every corner, and this is actually what prompted me to start doing research in this area. I was in dialysis centers for 20 years, and I started thinking, gosh, why in the world in Memphis are there dialysis centers going up on every corner? Because they are. It's like a Walgreens, just on every corner. And so I started doing research when I was getting my master's program on, surely there's something we can do to slow this down nutritionally. And when you looked over at Europe, they were doing things very differently than what we were doing here in America. And so that's what my entire master's paper was on. But even if you look into history, before we even had dialysis, because we didn't used to have dialysis, and it didn't used to be available. It was only became available to people in the 70s for financial reasons. But if you look back into history, all of these researchers treated chronic kidney disease. The treatment was diet. And the diet was low in protein and de-emphasized animal protein. And all of these researchers, even back to 1918, showed a decrease in uremic symptoms. Uremic symptoms just means when you get toxic and you start having all the issues with kidney disease. So then if you look at other countries, you can look at India. So India recently has had an increase of kidney disease because higher hypertension and diabetes. And sadly, there, fewer than 10% of patients with incident end-stage renal disease, when they hit end-stage, can get dialysis due to limited availability and cost over there. And so there were two researchers, Shaw and Patel, and what they did was they said, we've got to do something different. Same thing that they did back in history. And so they took 29 stable stage 5 patients and with slowly progressive kidney disease. 14 agreed to a low-protein diet, the others didn't. And the 14 that agreed to the low-protein diet had a slower decline in creatinine clearance than the others. So, and this diet it wasn't vegan, but it was natural vegetarian just because that's the culture over there in India. And so why is this not talked about? Why do physicians not usually recommend this? Some do, there are a few that do, but most don't. And that's because there's this trial way back in 1994. It's called the MDRD trial. And this trial was very poorly designed, but the results were that if you change diet, it really does nothing. And that's not true. Because this diet was based on prescribed protein intake rather than actual protein intake. And I can tell you as a dietitian that if I prescribe something, if I tell people to do something, they don't always do it. Some do, a lot of them do, but they don't always. And so you can't go by prescribed. You've got to actually look at what the person is doing. They didn't have to show, the participants didn't have to show evidence of progressive renal failure. Or if they're slow in progression, you want to know that they're progressing. ACE inhibitors mask the benefit of diet, so ACE inhibitors are important and ARBs are important, but they'll mask the benefit. And so, but in this trial, they didn't control that. So they could still take the ACE inhibitors, but it needed to be done in a controlled fashion. They didn't do that. So there was just a lot of problems. But then they did a secondary analysis of this MDRD trial, and what they showed was that a decrease in the intake of protein from 0.9 grams per kilogram of body weight down to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight a day showed a 33% deceleration in progression, meaning that it's slow progression. So thankfully, we've moved forward. Y'all know how excited I was when I saw the 2020 update of the KDOP guidelines. Just wait till you see the KDO at the end. I saved it for the end for the grand finale. But the 2020 KDOP guidelines recommends that people that are not on dialysis, stage 3 through 5, they recommended the protein intake to be dropped down to 0.5 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. That is for earlier stages. So when I'm looking at people, that's what I'll do. If you switch to a total plant-based diet, eating whole foods and not chasing protein, like chasing after, plant-based nutrition has become a big deal now. So there is everything in the world, the Beyond Burgers and the this and the that. Don't chase all that, just eat whole plant foods. You will pretty much land at about 4 to 6. And if you are all the way down to stage 3, if you're in stage 3, this is enough usually. And most of the time when people switch to the plant-based proteins, people that I work with, that GFR goes the other way, it gets better. If somebody comes to me and they are beyond that, let's say they're stage 4 or beyond, then what KDOP recommends and what I do, and what they were doing in Europe long before we ever started this, was that you decrease it down now to a very low protein diet. This is something you really need to work with a dietitian on because the protein is so low, 0.28 to 0.43 grams per kilogram of body weight. And so it's so low that you would become malnourished if you just did this. But what you do is you supplement back with something called a keto analog of amino acids. And that will keep you from being malnourished, but it also will scavenge protein from the other protein that you're taking in. So let me explain that for a minute. A keto acid or a keto analog of amino acid only became available in the United States about 2 years ago. There's 2 companies that provide them. I was so excited when this happened because before that I didn't have anything I could use. I tried to get them sent over from Europe, but you couldn't get them here. It was cost prohibitive. What they are is they're amino acids. They're missing the nitrogen. So what happens is you drop the protein down. They keep you from being malnourished, but they will also, because they're missing nitrogen, now they're looking for nitrogen. So you're still going to be eating some protein. You're still going to have that endogenous protein breakdown. But what the keto acids are going to do, that instead of that nitrogen going to your kidneys, having to be filtered out, those keto acids are going to get it and make new amino acids in your body. So they work really in 2 ways. They're fantastic. So I'm super excited that they are available now in the United States. And then this is just for diabetics. The protein recommendation is a little bit higher, just trying to keep glucose control. Okay, so we talked about the amount of protein. Now let's move to the type of protein, because that does matter too. Okay, for every 33% increase in plant protein in a chronic kidney disease patient's diet, a 23% lower risk of mortality ensues. Okay, so, and this is from the University of Utah School of Medicine. Why is this? Okay, if you are a kidney patient in here right now, you are not just your kidneys. This is what I tell people all the time. You still have other organs. You have a heart, you have a brain, you have vasculature. And so it matters what you eat for that part of your body too. And so when we eat more plant protein, it preserves health in 1,000,001 different ways. So if you look at it, you gotta think about, well, what is protein come packaged with, right? So plant-based protein, 0 cholesterol, no saturated fat unless you're adding tropical oils. It's very alkaline, full of antioxidants, full of fiber, less uremic waste. The phosphorus is very poorly absorbed, which is something that you want. And there's no additives if you eat whole food plant-based. Animal-based, what does that come packaged with? Cholesterol, saturated fat, it's very acidotic, it's void of antioxidants, there is no fiber, it has a higher uremic waste, higher phosphorus absorption, and a lot of times this meat is injected with potassium and phosphorus additives, and those additives are much higher, more highly absorbed than natural potassium and phosphorus. So this is a study. And I like this study because it is a very, it shows just how effective a low protein plant-based diet is, because this is a very hard population here. These are elderly people, greater than 70 years old. And I can tell you that dialysis is hard on this population. But they had a very low GFR, 5 to 7. And so what they did was they examined different treatment regimens for the elderly, for this group. And so these people were either randomly assigned to a very low protein vegan diet that was supplemented with keto analogs, or they put them on dialysis with no dietary interventions. And over the 26.5 months of this study, the death rates of the two groups were not statistically different. So that shows you just the power of plant-based nutrition, of using nutrition to slow progression of kidney disease and preserve health. So why plants? Why are we talking about plants? Because we want to give you a functional kidney rest. We're going to talk about acidosis, inflammation, and gut health. So functional rest. I really like this slide. I use it all the time, and it's in my books. And it's from an old study, but I still like it. So this is just showing, it kind of reminds me of like, if you think of if like blood glucose in diabetics, like, well, if they eat this food, then the blood glucose does this. And so this is talking about GFR, and it's post-meal. And so you see here that the meat load shoots that GFR up, and then it comes back down. And then the soy load, the plant-based protein load, is much more stable. And so you may be thinking, well, don't I want my GFR to be high? Well, yeah, you do over the long term, but you don't want short-term spikes in that GFR, because what you're seeing here is that the kidneys are working harder. They're having to process all that nitrogen and all that, everything going on with the animal protein, which includes acidosis. So I was in a talk yesterday, and they were talking about the functions of the kidney. One of them was acid-base balance, right? Well, if we want the kidneys to rest, we've already talked about we don't want them having to filter out a bunch of nitrogen waste. Okay, what's another job they do? Well, they perform acid-base balance, right? So they secrete hydrogen ions in the urine, and they reabsorb bicarbonate back to the blood. So I say the kidneys are the master chemists of the body. They look at the blood and they go, we need this, we don't need this, we're going to absorb this, we're going to get rid of this. And we know that this is impaired once the GFR hits below 40. And so if it's impaired, and if we're trying to let the kidneys rest, then we don't want them to have to perform this as much, right? And so, and then there's other issues with acidosis, like increased degradation of muscle protein and muscle wasting. Well, you definitely don't want that. Bone disease. We already know that there's issues that the kidneys also perform what we call bone mineral metabolism. Well, we don't want to have to deal with more bone disease because we're eating too much animal protein and we're in an acidotic state. decreased synthesis of albumin, increased rate of progression. We're trying to slow progression. It increases inflammation in the body, and impaired insulin sensitivity and responsiveness. So does lowering the acid load from diet slow progression? Yes, it does. So particularly animal protein is the principal source of acid generation in our body. So when we're thinking about, and I'm going to go over this a little bit more, but when you're thinking about acidosis in food, you want to think about what does it do inside the body. Eating an acid-forming diet inside the body increases the hormones angiotensin 2, aldosterone. Those two are things that we take ACE inhibitors for, right? We don't want to increase those. And then endothelin, which is going to promote more inflammation, which I'll go over later. And my next talk is on just straight inflammation. So I'll go over a little bit more in there too. But short term, these hormones help excrete acid, so you think, oh, this is a good thing. We want to get rid of the acid. But long term, they're going to worsen kidney function. Okay, so let's talk about diet and acidosis. Net endogenous acid proteins, that means acid production, that means your body producing acid. Endogenous is always your body producing it. It depends on the amount and type of protein that we eat. So low protein, high fruit and vegetable intake has the lowest net acid production in the body. So in fact, there was a study done in 2012 where researchers took stage 2 kidney disease, and they either put them on a sodium bicarbonate supplement, which I do sometimes, which is baking soda. If I cannot get the CO2, I'll look at my patient's CO2. If I can't get it down where I want it with diet, occasionally I'll give a little bit of sodium bicarbonate. But what they do is they get sodium bicarbonate, or they just increase the number of fruits and vegetables in these patients' diets. Both treatments were intended to lower the acid environment of the body. And what they found was that the patients that had more fruits and vegetables actually improved their acidosis even more, but also other parameters, which we've already talked about why that happens, because of the health benefit overall for the whole body of fruits and vegetables. So now we're to a topic called potential renal acid load, okay? And this is something you should definitely be aware of. So it is basically the acid-forming potential of a certain food, right? So whatever you eat outside the body, so you would think like a lemon outside the body would seem very acid, right? But inside the body it's very alkaline. So it's a low potential renal acid load. So if you look here, this is just a very basic list. You can go online and Google potential renal acid load, and you can find these massive lists of every food and what their potential renal acid load is nowadays. But if you look at it, basically fruits and vegetables have a negative number, meaning that they're very alkaline. And then the higher the number gets, the more acid producing that food is. So, and the problem that I see a lot is that people go out on the internet and try to figure out what to do with their diet because their kidneys are failing, and they read something for dialysis that says you need to limit potassium. And so then they cut out all the fruits and vegetables out of their diet, and then they become acidotic. And I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to show you later why that is so, it's not accurate. But don't ever go out on the internet and just look at diet, because it's almost always going to be for dialysis, because the big dialysis companies put all that out. Okay, so now we're moving on to inflammation. So we've done protein waste, we've done acidosis, and now we're doing inflammation. I'm just going to hit this at a high note here because I'm going to talk about it in here in an hour. But why you should care about inflammation. So everybody I work with, I say, if you're a kidney patient, you're a heart patient. You automatically are, especially if you've got a protein-spilling disease. We know that goes along with abnormal lipid profiles and things such as that. But there's so many other things, there's other reasons that, besides just lipids, that kidney disease contributes to cardiovascular disease. Even like, the calcification because of the deranged bone mineral metabolism, and anemia if your heart's having to work harder. So we really want to protect our heart. Inflammation definitely contributes to cardiovascular disease. Increased morbidity and mortality. It can cause malnutrition, insulin resistance. It contributes to anemia, mineral bone disease, and progression of kidney damage. So if you are anemic, what's interesting when I was doing anemia management in the dialysis centers, I mean, if somebody in a dialysis center got an abscess tooth, or maybe if they're diabetic and got a wound on their foot, man, their anemia parameters went all over the place because they were inflamed. So it's a big deal. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about inflammation? So if you think about, there's different ways you can look at it. If you think about like an apple that begins to brown, that is what's called oxidation. Okay, so I want you to keep oxidant and oxidative stress and oxidation. Keep those words in your head. So it's oxidative stress. It will lower albumin levels, and what we want is antioxidants to fix this problem. Okay, so now we're back in chemistry. Remember I said, remember that word oxidant. So in your body, in all of our bodies, we have these things called free radicals or oxidants, right? And they are missing an electron in the outer shell. And they're very angry, as you can see here on this picture. And so what they want to do is they are in search of that electron. So they go to a very healthy cell and steal it. Okay, now that one's an oxidant. So it goes to another cell, steals it. Now that one's an oxidant. And it's this chain reaction, and over time, you're damaging DNA. Well, you've got your friendly antioxidant here. Who knows where antioxidant? You've probably heard that word. Y'all heard that word, antioxidant? That comes from what foods? Anybody know? Fruits and vegetables, things rich in color. The antioxidant is so nice, it comes along and gives the free radical its extra electron, and then stops that whole process. So even if you don't have kidney disease, this goes on in your body. When you exercise, you produce free radicals. And so everybody should be eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. Okay, so how do you know? Like, well, how do I know which foods are high in fruits and vegetables, or high in antioxidants? Well, there's something called an ORAC scale. And this stands for oxygen radical absorbance capacity. Now, all you have to know is the total antioxidant capacity of a food. How effective is this as an antioxidant? And so what it's done in a test tube. So what they do is they take an oxidant, and then they take a food that's high in antioxidants, and then they take something that's very prone to oxidation. They put them all in the test tube together, and they say, how well does this food high in antioxidants protect that vulnerable thing that we put in the tube, in the test tube? And then they give it a number. And so you'll see here, the higher the number, the better. And those are foods that you want to include in your diet. So you see things like acai and wild blueberries, things such as that. Okay, and then I want you to go down to the middle. Do you see dried oregano there? Yeah. Isn't that crazy how high that is? So this is such a benefit for kidney patients because you need to limit salt, right, anyway. All these dried spices are so high in antioxidants that you're killing two birds with one stone. You are lowering your inflammation in your body, but you're also not getting as much sodium because you're going to spice with all these spices that are going to boost your antioxidant level. So I'm telling y'all, I eat this massive salad every day for lunch. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see me with all my massive salads. My kids say, Mom, you eat a bucket of salad, and I do. It's huge. But on that, I will sprinkle all these spices. Every day, I'm conscious of that to try to boost my spice intake, to boost my antioxidant capacity. Okay? So now we're going to move along to the gut. You may be thinking, why are we talking about the gut when you're at a kidney conference? But the gut has everything to do with everything else in your body. This is new research. So everything I'm telling you today will probably change in 2 weeks because it's just this huge, big deal right now. But the gut microbiome, we have a microbiome all over our whole body, but we're really focusing on the gut because the gut talks to everything. You have a nerve called the vagus nerve that goes from your gut to your brain. I mean, your gut talks to everything. It talks to your kidneys. There's something called the gut-kidney axis, and it just talks to everything. So what is the gut microbiome? It is the sum of all the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, everything you have in your body. You're more bacteria than you are human. You have just a ton of all these different kind of bacteria in your gut. And so these are terms that you need to know. So prebiotic is food for these microbes. Okay? So everything you eat, when you put something in your mouth, it affects the gut microbiome. Probiotic are microbes with beneficial qualities. You want a lot of these. You can have probiotics in your gut. You can take probiotics as a supplement, and there are probiotics in certain foods. So this kind of gets confusing. But they're beneficial bacteria. And then a postbiotic, or a metabolite, is what is produced. So when you eat certain foods, it affects your gut, and those gut microbiomes produce things that go all over your body. This is super important for kidney disease. So there's something called gut dysbiosis, or the gut-kidney axis. So the interconnections between the gut and the kidney are bidirectional, and they're collectively called the gut-kidney axis. So the fecal microbiota composition and functionality seem to play a crucial role in the homeostasis and development of kidney disease. So what they're researching is, hey, the gut actually, it plays a big role in if you're progressing or if you're not, and there'll be more and more coming out on this. I feel like drug companies are going to start moving in this direction, but anyway, so what causes altered gut microbiota in kidney disease? So there's something called uremia, or causes a leaky gut. You may have heard of that before, a leaky gut. And I'll go over this more in the next class as well. But we talked about the podocyte of the kidney that you want everything tightened. The same thing in your gut. You've got these, they call them tight junctions, and you want them tight. But when they open up, some of the bacteria that's in that gut will get out and go all over the body, and it increases inflammation. You don't want that. And so there's certain things that will lead to that, like certain medications can lead to that. A low fiber diet. Fiber is the most underrated nutrient in the world. People do not eat enough fiber, especially people with kidney disease do not eat enough fiber because they went on the internet and saw they needed to decrease fruits and vegetables, and then they quit eating fiber. But then when you eat a high animal protein diet, remember I said that whatever you eat feeds certain microbes. When you eat a high animal protein diet, it is feeding microbes in your gut that produce kidney toxins, okay? Those are called trimethylene N oxide, p-cresyl sulfate, and indoxyl sulfate. Okay, so let's just talk about those real quick. What is TMAO? TMAO, see, it's much easier to put a long name. TMAO is a compound that is produced by gut microbiota after the ingestion of foods high in carnitine and choline, things like meat, poultry, eggs, things like that. And so it fosters the capability of inflammatory cells in atherosclerotic plaque. So when we're talking about, now we're kind of talking about heart disease, but if you're a kidney patient, you're a heart patient. In your arteries and veins, there's something called the endothelium. You want that smooth and healthy. If you've got inflammation going on or anything that damages that, like TMAO, it's going to increase your risk of atherosclerosis, which we don't want. It also not only acts as a biomarker of kidney disease, but it is a kidney toxin. So it contributes to kidney disease progression, and it contributes to heart disease progression. Neither one of those which you want. Interestingly, people who eat a plant-based diet, if you took a complete vegan and fed them a steak, they wouldn't produce this because they don't have the microbes in there. They hadn't been feeding the microbes in their gut that would produce this. They'd have to keep eating it, and then they'd start producing it. Two others that we'll go over is p-cresyl sulfate and indoxyl sulfate. So these are also derived from the gut microbiota. They increase overall mortality, and plant-based diets decrease the production of these by as much as 60%. Okay, so that is all my reasons why today I am selling you a plant-based diet for kidney disease. And here's something that I want to tell you is that, one of the talks I was in, they were saying, we know that the medications we give you are hard. We know that the side effects of those medications are hard, right? I don't live in that world, and I don't pretend to, and I can't understand that. But what I can understand is this, that when you improve your diet, even if you improve it a little bit, even if you just started eating more plants, the side effects of that are not hard. They're fantastic. You begin to feel better. You begin to have more energy. Your gut is healthier. Your heart is healthier. That's the side effect of that. And it's something you can control. I know a lot of times, a lot of patients would tell me, especially if they're on dialysis, they get angry. I feel out of control. Okay, you can control your diet. You can control if you get up tomorrow and exercise. You can control, sometimes you can control if you sleep, if you get good sleep hygiene. But these are things that you can control, that are in your hands, that you can do. And so I encourage you to. Now, there are some typical reservations, like phosphorus and potassium, because of the internet. So what you need to know about phosphorus is, if I tell my patients, if you're eating whole plant foods, it's not really, you don't have to worry about it so much. Unless you're very late stage, but even then, most of the time you're not going to see the phosphorus go high, and I'll tell you why. But plant-based phosphorus is much less bioavailable. So phosphorus in flesh foods, like animal products, they have a relatively high bioavailability. But the phosphorus in plant foods, they're bound up in something called phytate. And humans do not express the enzyme to break that down. It's called phytase. We don't even express that. So you're not going to absorb the phosphorus from plant foods like you will from animal foods. The other problem with animal foods is this: they inject those meats most of the time with phosphorus additives. And this is something kind of new. I mean, I guess newish. I've been in this so long that it's probably not that new, but a lot of dietitians started getting frustrated probably, I don't know, 10 years ago when they started doing this, because they're like, I can't even educate my patients anymore because they're injecting all these meats with phosphorus additives, and the phosphorus additives are almost 100% absorbed. And so, but they couldn't, it wasn't on the label, they couldn't determine what was going on. So it's gotten to be a real challenging thing. But then there's also something called FGF23, and that is higher in meat-eating subjects. So let me just tell you what that is. So FGF23, let me make sure I'm not going to tell you that. Oh, I am. You know what? I'm going to come to that. I'm going to tell you what FGF23 is. So this is a study that was done. It's a crossover study. So what that means is they took the same group of people, and for 1 week they put them on a vegetarian diet, and for the other week they put them on a meat-rich diet, and they kind of switched them back and forth like that. And so the two diets, though, this is pretty interesting. They were similar nutritionally, and they had the same amount of phosphorus. Okay. And so, but after, when they looked at the results, the fasting serum phosphorus concentration was lower in the vegetarian diet than the meat-eating diet, even though it was the same amount of phosphorus in those diets, because, again, like I said, they're not absorbing it. So I told you I'd get to this fiberblast growth factor 23, FGF23. The reason that that I'll hardly ever see high phosphorus in a pre-dialysis patient is because of this right here. So FGF23, it's a bone-derived regulator of vitamin D and phosphorus metabolism. It was identified about 15 years ago, and what it is it's a phosphatoric hormone, which means that it causes your body to urinate out phosphorus. So it's going to drop the serum phosphorus level. But the problem is, this is never drawn. Like your nephrologist is never going to draw this lab, but it's still going up in the background. You know that it is. And so it rises with the severity of kidney disease. And it is independently associated with the faster progression of kidney damage. It's also associated with cardiovascular disease again, morbidity and mortality. And the phosphorus load appears to be what's stimulating this. So like I said before, if you're eating plants, you're not going to have as high a phosphorus load. Higher percentage of plant protein is associated with lower FGF23. So you can just know, even though this isn't being drawn, just know that if you're eating plants, it's going to be lower. And then we'll get to potassium. So potassium is the one thing that occasionally you have to watch out for. But again, we're back at 2020. Thank goodness, KDOKI changed the guidelines. And what they said was that instead, we used to have these strict numbers. Like you can only have this much potassium, you can only have this much phosphorus. But now they say that you adjust it to the patient's labs. So if your potassium level is fine, we don't restrict potassium. If I have a very late stage patient that is on an ACE or an ARB, I'm pretty cautious about it, but still it's hardly ever gets high. And usually it's the reasoning behind why it's high is pretty easy to figure out. But there was a study that looked at, because everybody wants to run to fruits and vegetables when there's a potassium problem, but there was a study that looked at, this is on dialysis patients, because dialysis patients you do really have to be careful with potassium. But this was looking at the dietary potassium intake of hemodialysis patients. And the top 10 sources weren't even fruits and vegetables. It was beef, chicken, Mexican food, and burgers. Then you got down to the wings. Because also these foods, again, are injected with potassium additives. So fruits and vegetables vegetables don't have additives, the higher fiber content of fruits and vegetables also will decrease the absorption of potassium. So, and then you gotta take certain medications into consideration. And so this is just a comparison of different foods that, and the potassium content, so it's just not that different. And the thing about food too is this, and the thing about nutrition is this, it is not an exact science. Everybody wants to say, well, how much of this do I need, or how much of that do I need? And I can give you a guideline, but the thing is, like even food labels, they're about 20% off. If you buy 2 oranges in the grocery store, if this one came from one country and this one came from another, or this one sat in the store longer than this one, the vitamin C content of those is totally different. So when you sell these lists, on the internet, I mean, they're good guidelines, we need guidelines, but they're not exact. It's just, and that's the frustrating time. Sometimes like, I'm just tired of this, being a dietitian, and then like, no, I still love it. But it is, because it's not exact, okay? So it can be frustrating. Okay, but non-nutritional causes of hyperkalemia, or hyperkalemia. So acidosis, I'm gonna come back to this right here, the acidosis and the glucose, they're kind of the same mechanism of action. But acidosis, if you're acidotic, that's one of the first things I look at. If I've got a high potassium level, I look at the CO2 to see, are they acidotic? Insulin resistance, certain medications, we know ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers, potassium-sparing diuretics, those will raise potassium levels. Tissue destruction, if someone's had like a crush injury or something like that, starvation, certain diseases, chronic constipation, because you can reabsorb that potassium, GI bleeds, blood transfusions, things like that. So acidosis and potassium, what's the deal with this? And it's kind of the same thing with high serum glucose, but when you're acidotic, what it does, potassium is an intracellular, it likes to be in the cell, it's an intracellular electrolyte. And when you become acidotic, that state in the body causes that potassium to leave the cell and come into the serum. That's why the potassium is high. So if we correct the acidosis, which brings us right back to why you should eat more fruits and vegetables and less animal protein, because people will say fruits and vegetables are high in potassium, pull them out. No, actually, what you're doing is you're making yourself more acidotic, so you're causing the potassium to leave the cell and go into the blood, and now your potassium is high. The problem is acidosis, not the fruits and vegetables. So that is another reason to look at that potential renal acid load food and eat foods that are less acid forming. Okay, let's talk about some case studies here. So this is the first man I ever worked with. This was back in 2012. He was 84 years old. He was a Korean War veteran. And his son heard me speak. And y'all, I had never even done this before. I mean, I had just been doing research for a master's program. He said, I want you to work with my dad. I said, all right, I will. So I started working with him, and they wanted to start this man on dialysis. His GFR was down at 15. And he said, no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm working with this girl over here. And I was like, okay, like the weight of the world's on my shoulders. I'm trying to keep this man off dialysis, and I've never done this before. I did not have keto analogs. They weren't available in the United States at that time. But I said, you know what, let's do it. And so we started working together, and you see that his GFR from 15 shot up. That was just switching to a plant-based, a low-protein plant-based diet. We supplemented with different amino acids, which wasn't the best at that time. But gosh, we didn't even have the tools we needed, and look what happened. Because he was so late stage and I didn't have the tools, I knew that he would probably decline. But we kept this man off dialysis for 16 months. And that may not seem like a really long time, but I can tell you what it is, and especially for someone who's elderly. And when you know, I don't know if y'all have ever been in a dialysis center, and I know you're probably trying to stay out of it, but here's the deal. If you're doing in-center hemodialysis, so what I tell my patients to try to motivate them is this. Have you ever gone on a road, if you went on a road trip for 5 hours and you didn't stop at all? How would that feel? Like you're just sitting in the car, you didn't stop at all. Oh, and by the way, you can't move this arm. Because when you do, the machine alarms. And now, the nurses are coming over saying, stop moving your arm. So you're sitting still for 5 hours and you never get a break. That's dialysis. That's in-center dialysis. I never do in-center dialysis. I do home dialysis. But what I'm saying is, it's a big deal to keep somebody off dialysis for 16 months. It's become the passion of my life to keep people off dialysis. Because I feel like people with kidney disease, they get left behind. You know, everybody knows about heart disease, everybody knows what pink ribbon is. People with kidney disease, they just get left behind. This is his albumin, so people would say to me back then, oh, they're going to become malnourished. Well, no, actually what happens is when you eat a lot of animal protein, you begin to get more uremic, and people get this metallic taste in their mouth because they've got so many toxins in their body. And so then they just spontaneously quit eating. Well, he kept eating. And his albumin, they told me his albumin was going to drop. Well, actually it got better. It did eventually drop, but he entered dialysis with an albumin of 3.5. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a patient enter the dialysis center with me who crashed in the ER because they weren't getting good care prior to that, and they had an albumin of like 2. And I can tell you that low albumin is a huge indicator of morbidity and mortality in dialysis. Okay, this lady came to me. She she was over with her doctor, and she looked on the screen, and he didn't even tell her she had kidney disease, but she was a nurse, and she looked on the screen and said stage 3 kidney disease, and she kind of flipped out. She started looking for a dietitian and couldn't find one. Luckily, her niece was a dialysis dietitian, and she said, I know somebody who works with pre-dialysis patients, I'll send you to her. So we started working together, just by changing, we didn't have to do keto analogs, just by changing her diet, her GFR improved. So this was kind of the pinnacle of my career, and this was when I was writing my first book. So what I was doing with these people, I said, listen, don't even pay me if you'll just give me your data. I just want to know that this is working, you know? And so she said, we had an appointment, and she said, I'm gonna go pick up my labs and I'll come meet you. And I said, okay. So she goes and she gets her lab and she opens it up, and her GFR was above 70. And she looked at me and she was like, oh my gosh, Jennifer, you saved my life. And I was just like, okay, I can quit now. I mean, that was like, just, I can't tell you how much better it is to see people get better than to watch this constant decline on dialysis. And so, you know what? Her nephrologist told her, please stop coming to see, you don't even come see me anymore. This was a young guy, IgA nephropathy. His mom found me in a spin class. It's amazing how people find me, but the spin instructor knew what I did, and she told the mom, and the mom was like, oh my God, did you help my son? I said, sure. So we started working together. His urine protein, you can see how quickly it declined just by changing his diet. And so did the serum creatinine. These are other just various, I tried to pick some different causes. Lupus nephritis went from 39 up to 54. And then unknown, people say, I get this all the time, they don't know why. 38 to 47 from just April to June. Okay, so in summary, 2 considerations. So if you look at the chronic renal insufficiency cohort, a large number of participants, multi-center, multi-ethnic study, revealed that the greater percentage of plant protein was associated with the lower FGF23, and the patients were less acid. Greater percentage of plant protein was not associated with high potassium, low albumin, or low hemoglobin. And I'm telling you that because I want you to know it's safe. And then the grand finale, KDIGO, which is the global kidney guidelines. So KDOKI is United States, KDIGO is global. And this is hot off the press, 2024. Advise people with chronic kidney disease to adopt healthy and diverse diets with a higher consumption of plant-based foods compared to animal-based foods, and a lower consumption of ultra-processed foods, which, by the way, I didn't even get into that. Those are so addictive. Stay away from packages, processed foods, fast foods, all those things. And then use renal dietitians or accredited nutrition providers to educate people with chronic kidney disease. And so for further help, my book is available on Amazon, and this is the newest book. So the first book I wrote with practitioners because I was tired of patients not getting care and for people saying that nutrition didn't matter. So I wrote this big book to practitioners to say, yes, it does matter, and here's why. Well, then patients read that book. And so then I said, and then they started messaging me, you didn't put recipes, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. I said, okay. So I wrote another one for the patient. So this is the one you're going to look for the patient. But then they told me this. I don't like to read, and I don't like to cook. So write a book, but I don't like to read, and I don't like to cook. I said, right. So every chapter is 10 pages or less, and every recipe is 5 ingredients or less. If you are chefs, and you would like to add to that, if that recipe is bland, please don't write me and say, I hated that recipe, because I only put 5 ingredients in there for people who don't like to cook. But you can certainly add if you are a cook. This is where you find me. I'm gonna take a few questions, but then I have to ask you questions, remember? I'm gonna see if you paid attention, and I'm gonna give away to us. Any questions?
We have questions, we'll just bring them up to them.
I have a question.
Okay.
You can go up to the microphone. First of all, thank you. My family has adopted a mostly plant-based diet. I've been doing this for years, like little things that they don't really know. It's like change the milk to a plant-based milk. You know, like little things like meatless Mondays, stuff like that. So it's taken time, but my husband has always had this frame of mind, like a meal is built around the meat. And so, which is not necessarily how I think, but I made him watch this Netflix series, You Are What You Eat. So it's very interesting, right? So, spoiler alert, it's like this, study of twins, like identical twins, and they look at diet and exercise and lab work. They're always doing lab work in different studies. Anyways, and so it's very interesting that the plant-based people did much better, or their labs were much better, and then another spoiler, you tell people that cheated on the plant-based diet didn't work as good. I know they admitted it, right?
Yeah.
That one, and then so then I have my husband. He's not much of a book reader, but he loves audiobooks when he drives. So he listened to How Not to Die.
Yay! Awesome.
On Audible, and now he is like 100% in.
Go husband.
And so like even today he's like, asking me, what I want for dinner, and and he's like, and we have some friends that are coming over, and he's like, well, should I still have meat? Anyways, but the other thing too is my kids, coming home from school, especially like my teenager, who's my kidney kid, and he'll be like, "What's for dinner?" Because they're always hungry, and now I just write vegetables. And at first it was like, like this, or bad meme or whatever. But now whenever I write it and I'm like vegetables, and now he's like, which ones? And so it's like this, so anyways, it's doable, it's fun, like the recipes are amazing, like what you can find. It's fun to kind of experiment, so anyways, I just wanted to say thank you, and that it is possible, and it really does help lab work a lot, so.
Thank you so much for that. You're awesome.
Question. So I've actually been vegetarian since I was 16, but the thing that I struggle with is for the iron, because as a kid I was always anemic, but what are some foods that are rich in iron? Because my doctor has me taking iron supplement, but besides spinach, what other foods, or is that in your book, or kind of what do you recommend for the iron portion?
I have this really neat thing I recommend for iron. I love this. It's called Lucky Iron Fish, okay? And it is a little iron fish. And what you do with this little iron fish is whenever you're cooking something, you just throw it over in there. And it will release iron into your food, so that now all food has more iron. And I recommend that all the time. It's so interesting. And when I was in school, I took this class called Global Nutrition, and it was the same concept. So people who live over in like third world countries that don't get enough iron, what they do is they put nails in water and let it rust, and then they drink the water. They're getting the iron. And so it's the same concept. So I would tell you, go Google Lucky Iron Fish and start putting that over in your food and make every food iron.
Okay, thank you.
Cast iron skillets kind of help too. You can do that too.
We have a question.
Question for you when it comes to the spices. I love using spices.
Wonderful.
Probably way too much, but is it better to use them fresh or dry? Because I use a combination of both. One of my top ones is turmeric. I love using turmeric. So what view do you have on that?
I would say both. I mean, I use both. I don't have a green thumb. I wish I did. I'm trying so hard. But one thing I can grow is herbs, because they're weeds. And so I even, by midsummer in Mississippi, it's so hot, I'm like, I'm tired those on the plant. But I had some oregano, y'all, last year. I just left it out in a pot. We had a big snow in Mississippi, which we don't usually get. That bad boy is still alive this year. So I would say do both. I would do fresh and dry. Dry is gonna be more concentrated, but fresh is so delicious. So I would do that. And you can also get, here's one this thing I love. We have Kroger. I don't know what y'all have wherever you live, but in the grocery section, there are these little containers that are kind of in between. They're like not all the way dry, kind of fresh, not dry. I wish I had a picture of it because I recommend this all the time too. But they have these chives. Oh my gosh, they're so good. The basil. It just, when you start cooking with things like that, you want less salt because it is just so good. The smell, the taste, everything. So much better than just pouring a bunch of salt on there or eating a bunch of highly processed foods. It's just so much better. In fact, yesterday we went to this really cool place here, and their salad, they hardly had any salad dressing on it, y'all. It was so good because you could taste the vegetables. And the more vegetables you eat, the more you're gonna like the taste of them. You eat what you like. So if you're used to eating junk food, that's what you're gonna like. You're not gonna like vegetables. Give it some time, keep eating them, and you'll eventually like them.
So I'm a patient parent, and I've asked the question about protein to our doctors, and protein is important for growth.
It is.
So what is the guideline for kids with kidney disease?
Yes, so, okay, that's a really good question. So I'm not a kid dietitian, but I will say this. If you're talking about a child here and they are growing, what I would tell you is they do need protein. Remember, it's the amount and the type. Go with plants. Stick with plant proteins. That's going to be safer. You don't want them to become malnourished, and I mean, I don't see why you couldn't use keto analogs even. It would depend on, it would also, like if I was, I'd have to know what stage they were, if they're spilling protein. Because here's the other thing, people think, well, I'm spilling protein and my albumin's dropping, so I need to eat more protein, but it's the opposite. You know, if they're spilling protein, they need less protein, but it's a balance. I would work with a dietitian because there's so many factors with what you're asking me, but you are absolutely correct. They do need protein for growth. If you feel, if they're needing more, if there's kidney disease is stable, I would just boost up the plant protein.
This will have to be our last question, just because we're right at time.
And I have to give 2 books away.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be quick. So I know this is very taboo in the kidney world, but I worked with a dietitian for a long time, and I saw 0 success with plant-based. So after trying that and trying everything, I started looking into autoimmune and carnivore, and my numbers over 6 months, like my GFR went up drastically. I stopped spilling protein. Like I'm doing so much better on carnivore, and I was wondering if that's like, I know it's like not allowed to be talked about in the kidney community, but I wasn't sure like if you've ever heard of that.
Of course, well, I haven't heard of the GFR getting better, but I will tell you, I just recently had a patient come to me who had done carnivore, and she lost all this weight and did all this, but her GFR dropped like 20 points. Her BUN shot out the roof. Her gut was a complete and utter wreck because she wasn't eating fiber. So there's not research there. That's the problem with a lot of these newer fad diets. There is no research. So you're kind of, if you want to go that way, you're on your own. There is a boatload of research with plant-based nutrition. Like I said, it's highly evidence-based. But I saw the opposite. So just be careful because you will for sure, you'll wreck your gut. The other thing I see with that is cholesterol going out the roof. And then people in that little area of nutrition or whatever they are, their social media influencers will say, oh, but cholesterol doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. It still does matter. It matters. So, especially for kidney condition. So just be careful, watch your numbers. Okay. Really quick, can I get this one really quick? Okay. Okay, you have to see if you raise your hand first. Okay, you ready? You watching? All right. What condition causes potassium to go from inside the cell to outside the cell? I got a hand over here. Only one person knows that answer. Don't pay attention. Right there. Over here. What is it? Boom, you want a book. Okay. What is it? Acidosis. If you're acidotic, it causes the potassium to leave the cell, which raises high serum potassium levels, so then I look at the CO2 and I'm like, oh gosh, your acidotic, and mix that and potassium goes down. Okay, true or false? Secondary analysis of the MDRD study showed lowering protein intake slowed progression. Boom! Good deal. True. Okay, so y'all can get your book after.